Well, I think we need to see that particular resolution, the one of the 20th of December 1966, in the context of what was happening at the time. That is to say, there had been a campaign waged by Spain politically at the United Nations and diplomatically, and also on the ground at the border against Gibraltar. So it was a combination of both. And in 1963 and 64, Sir Joshua Hassan and Peter Isler went to the United Nations. In 65, there was a consensus arrived at by the UN, and 66 a resolution was passed which said that Gibraltar needed to be decolonized, and basically asked for that to happen in agreement or in consultation, or rather in negotiation with Spain. Now, all this started because in 1946, after the Second World War, the UN, eight colonial powers in the UN listed the territories for which they were responsible. There were 74 of them. Most of them were British. By 1960, for example, 41 of the 50 remaining territories belonged to the United Kingdom. So it meant that the UK was seen as the colonial power, and perhaps as a very embodiment of colonialism by the United Nations. So when the Gibraltar issue was discussed in the UN in the 60s, it was in this context, in the context of many countries who had come out of colonialism and who had a grudge against the United Kingdom, in the context also of the USSR and the countries in the Warsaw Pact having a point to make against the United Kingdom, and also a numerically unbeatable block vote in the Committee of 24 of those two categories of nations, but also of Latin American countries that tended to support Spain. So that was the background against which we faced the resolution of 1965. Of 66, there were more that followed. Obviously, it wasn't the only one. They continued even after the referendum, declaring the referendum was null and void. So it was a difficult time for Gibraltar. But certainly one thing which we've always argued, and we continue to argue to this day, is that the people of Gibraltar have the right to self-determination, that is why we are on the list of non-self-governing territories, in order to be decolonized through self-determination.
So we're talking about the early 60s, when self-determination was itself a relatively young concept, wasn't it?
Well, it was a concept which was really born and which developed in that particular century, as it were, and it was hardened after the Second World War, when countries which were colonies emerged from colonial rule, huge parts of the world, India, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. So all the world, a huge section of the world, emerged from colonialism in those decades. Mm-hmm. Now, what does it mean today? Well, in 2008 there was the usual resolution tabled at the United Nations, what is known as the Omnibus Resolution, which includes a number of territories on the UN list. And there Spain tried to insert a clause which said that the right to self-determination did not apply in the case of territories where there was a dispute, a sovereignty dispute. Now, the UK mobilized, this was in 2008, the UK mobilized, went around securing votes from other countries for an amendment that they tabled, which succeeded in removing that. And the UK won that by 61 votes to 40, with 47 abstentions. So I think it shows that self-determination has been an evolving concept, but certainly in the context of the Charter of the United Nations, in the context of the covenants of the United Nations, in that context, there is absolutely no doubt that the people of Gibraltar enjoy the right to determine their own future.
We're talking about the 50th anniversary of this UN resolution. Was Spain hopeful at the time that the Spanish flag would be flying over the rock relatively soon after that resolution?
Well, remember, Franco predicted Gibraltar would fall like a ripe fruit. The fruit never ripened and it never fell, because obviously the people of Gibraltar were hardened in their determination to stand up to Spain and put up with 16 years of siege as a result. All this process at the United Nations and the restrictions at the land frontier, restrictions on maritime restrictions, telephone links being cut off, labour force being withdrawn, oxygen being denied to the hospital overnight, and people dying in the hospital as a result of that. All that campaign that Franco waged, leading to the closure of the land frontier, simply did not work, and the people of Gibraltar were strengthened in their determination to remain British.
So 50 years on, what reflections do you make on that 1966 resolution, and also the progress or lack thereof that has been made by Gibraltar at the United Nations since?
I think we have come very far as a people. We now we have a national day, we celebrate our own identity as a people within the overall umbrella of the British family of nations, which is what we are, part of the British family of nations and part of the wider Commonwealth of nations. That is what we are. But I think it's essentially extremely important that Gibraltar should go to the UN every year. First of all, before the Committee of 24, which is responsible for the non-self-governing territories that remain on the list. And secondly, to the fourth committee, which is called the Political and Decolonization Committee, which as C24 itself reports to make sure that we continue to put our points across. I mean, the term Committee of 24 is a misnomer. There are 29 countries on the committee, not 24. There used to be 24 at one stage. But look, for us here in Gibraltar, it means we need to target countries. We need to make sure we spell out what our views are, what our policies are, and they need to hear us say it. And I think it's essentially extremely important that we should go to the UN twice a year to make that point. Because if we don't, then the Spanish arguments will be unchallenged. So there is nothing better than us going ourselves and explaining that to the United Nations. There are 17 non-self-governing territories left on the United Nations list. There were 16. French Polynesia was put back on the list, and East Timor was the last one to be removed. But our aim has to be treated in the same way as all the other territories that remain on the list, and to be decolonized through the principle of self-determination.
So 50 years on, what reflections do you make on that 1966 resolution, and also the progress or lack thereof that has been made by Gibraltar at the United Nations since?
Well, my view, strictly speaking, is that the two are unrelated. That is, one is a process of the United Nations which has to lead to the removal of territories, and of our territory in this case, from the list of non-self-governing territories, which is one thing. And the other one is the decision taken by majority in the United Kingdom to leave the European Union. And I think that the two are separate. We know that the one who tried to link them both was the former Spanish Foreign Minister, Mr. Margallo. The new Foreign Minister is now saying things which are slightly different to what Mr. Margallo used to say. But certainly what Margallo was saying, we all know, was that, look, if you want to maintain a relationship with the European Union, or indeed to remain within it, then the only option Gibraltar has is to share sovereignty with Spain. We rejected that totally in 2002, and we reject it to this day. And the point that we made to Mr. Margallo and to other countries and MEPs and others that we were lobbying was that Spain was simply being opportunistic and linking two things which really had nothing to do with each other. Because if we have a special status within the European Union, or we have a relationship which allows us to have free movement and access to a single market, or whatever label or term you want to use, whatever you call it, that really has no bearing on the removal of Gibraltar from the United Nations list of non-self-governing territories.